Welcome. It is an honor and a pleasure to be in conversation with someone who, I think in all humility, I think has become a friend, someone who has spoken at Temple recently over the last few months, on a couple occasions, virtually and in person, and someone who has been an indispensable source of knowledge and insight and reflection of the unique experience of being both someone who has roots in the diaspora and someone who clearly has roots in the land of Israel. Yossi Klein Halevi is a renowned journalist, author, podcaster, and everything in between. And I just recommend all of you, please just Google his name, and you will find a treasure trove of information, books, articles, etc. Yossi, it's wonderful to spend some time with you. I so appreciate it, particularly with all the various ways in which you are being pulled to help the Jewish community and beyond better understand the current situation. First and foremost, how are you and your family and everybody?
First of all, it's wonderful to be with you, and so thank you. We're all okay. We're you know, clinging to routine and taking it really an hour at a time. I can't even say a day at a time. It's all so fluid, and I'm doing, as you know, I'm trying to get Israel's perspective out there. I've been working hard, and that's been a way for me personally to cope. But as soon as I stop working and I start thinking about what we've been through the last month, and it all just feels so overwhelming that sometimes it feels hard to literally breathe. And I have to remind myself to just breathe.
No, I think that's very important. Some degree of, I think so many of us are neglecting our our own well-being physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically as we are trying to be so outwardly focused. Just the other day, I had the pleasure of listening to you on Ezra Klein's podcast, and he as a kind of non-Orthodox young Jew out of New York with this incredible platform has been trying to bring a variety of different voices to speak on this. Tell us a little, and I recommend that people listen to the podcast. But tell me, just from your experience, who do you think was listening, and what message do you hope you were able to convey in that specific forum?
That's interesting. I felt since October 7th, I've felt that my main work is to strengthen the diaspora. And I am primarily interested in speaking to American Jews. And I imagine that Ezra Klein has a very wide Jewish listenership. I mean, the New York Times, and he's connected to the Times, it's primarily a Jewish enterprise. The people who edit, who write, who own it, and who read it. So, so it's almost like speaking to a Jewish audience. The reason, Danny, that I feel it's so important to be speaking specifically to the diaspora is because I feel that this is a moment, and I hate to use these words, but it's a moment of opportunity for a necessary reset in the American Jewish Israeli relationship. And I think we've all been surprised by how passionately American Jews have responded to this moment. And all of the eulogies for the imminent demise of the American Jewish liberal Israeli relationship, I think were premature. And all it took was a catastrophe to remind American Jews how much they really do care about Israel. And October 7th, it seems to me, was a glimpse, and we all felt this, it was a glimpse into the possible end of Israel. That's what it would look like. And American Jews are back. Many American Jews, not all, but many are back. I mean, I'm sure I would love to hear your observation on this and your experience. But I feel sitting in Jerusalem, and as you say, someone who grew up in the American Jewish community, and my career has been based on going back and forth between Israel and American Jewry. I feel that this is really the time where I personally want to be speaking to American Jews. That's that's how I define my work at this time.
No, absolutely, and I would agree with you that there has been kind of a new reconnection or revitalization in American Jewish pride, and particularly our connection to Israel. I think I've heard you say in another setting that that relationship of American Jews specifically to Israel conceptually had been waning a bit, or it didn't seem necessary. And it's unfortunate that it took a catastrophe to kind of help us to better and more clearly connect to that sense. But I'm glad it's there, and I hope we can leverage it for good moving forward. In the same vein, some have characterized what's currently going on as a multi-front war. For Israel, certainly most directly and imminently, but for diaspora Jewry in terms of advocacy and a level of vulnerability that even Israelis acknowledge as pretty significant for us. Again, from your unique vantage point, having one foot in the Israeli community and one in the diaspora from your background, what do you think are our greatest challenges here, and how do you think we should approach them?
What has hit me hardest, and I think it's hit American Jews hardest, is the transformation of universities from a not just a safe space for Jews, but the entry point into the American mainstream. You know, I went to Northwestern journalism school in the 1970s, and until the early 70s, there were quotas on Jews at Northwestern. And in my journalism class, this was 1977, 78, there were 40% Jews.
Hmm.
And not almost none of the teachers were Jewish. So because they still belonged to the old regime. But I saw the transformation happening. And I met my wife, who was not Jewish at the time, at university. And there was this sense of limitless possibility. I grew up in an Orthodox community in Brooklyn, and suddenly I'm in America. And 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 it was this moment of confirmation of the American promise to the Jews, and it happened most strongly at the university. And now the university seems to be rescinding that promise of unconditional Jewish acceptance. So I think that's, first of all, why the campus situation is so traumatic for American Jews. And I also think that this is something you and I were speaking about before we turned on the mics, that this is a time for liberal American Jewry to rethink its alliances. And American Jews have shown up time and time again for any minority in need. American Jews have invested a tremendous amount in interfaith work. Look, I've spent the last 10 years of my life working with American Muslim leaders through the Hartman Institute. And this is a turning point. This is a moment where we really need to look around and say, who's with us? And not only who isn't with us, but who's against us. Because we've discovered that people who we thought might be allies have really turned against us. So it's a shaking up time. It's a time for Jews to turn inward, but not to cut off our connections with the non-Jewish world, God forbid, and not to not to turn inward to the point where we see the world only through our fears, because that I think would be a betrayal of everything that the Jewish people in Israel, in the diaspora, have achieved since the Holocaust. And and we all were part of the previous generation's decision, which was very courageous after the Holocaust, to enter the world as Jews, to trust that Jews would be able to find a place in the world, which was not at all a given. My father was a Holocaust survivor. In 1945, he came out of the war convinced that Jews would never have a place in the world. It was the world. There were the Jews and the world. But Zionism and the two flags on the bima of American synagogues, what those two flags represented to, to my parents' generation and your parents' generation was the rehabilitation of the Jewish people, the resurrection of the Jewish people. And it happened in Israel and in America. These were the two main arenas of Jewish re-entry into the world, of Jewish healing. And so we need a serious reconsideration of who our allies are, but we cannot go back into a kind of mental ghetto where it's the Jews and the rest of the world.
No, I think that's beautifully stated, and I think you're right. And going even one step further, I think if we allow ourselves to be in that fearful defensive stance forever, we have achieved one of the objectives of those who are trying to constrain who we can be, if not wipe us out, and that is to always feel like the other. But I think there are some significant, unprecedented challenges that this has kind of evoked or forced to the surface for American Jews in our relationships.
We have been othered by a significant part of the camp that so many Jews identified with.
Absolutely, and I think that has been one of the rudest of awakenings amongst many that has come out of this post October 7th world. Looking kind of more directly at the conflict itself, while for some it may be too soon to contemplate this, regardless, we will all need to respond to the challenge of the future of Gaza after the neutralization of Hamas, God willing. You've talked about this in other venues. Tom Friedman, amongst others, have visions for what's going to need to happen to kind of make this all justifiable. What are some of your thoughts?
I think that we need to very quickly resurrect the Abraham Accords and reach out to the Saudis, try to resurrect the Saudi track, especially in connection with Gaza. And Gaza could be the opportunity for Israeli-Arab cooperation. This can only be solved through the region. This is, in its basis, this is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's an Israeli, Arab, and Muslim conflict. And behind Hamas and Hezbollah is Iran. And there are two forces in the region. There's the Iranian camp, and there is what I would want to believe is the camp of the Abraham Accords. Those who already are part of it and those who are potentially part of it. And so it's the camp of the Abraham Accords that needs to adopt Gaza as a project. This could be our first real project of beginning the process of rehabilitating the Middle East and shifting away from an Iranian-dominated Arab world, which is where things are headed. Iran controls 5 Arab countries, either directly or indirectly, and they all happen to be dysfunctional Arab countries, and that's not a coincidence. Iran thrives on catastrophe, on disintegration. And so you look at it's Yemen and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Libya. these are the countries where Iran is either in full control or gaining a foothold. And so my hope is that we're going to see the emergence or the reemergence of an Israeli-Arab alliance, but focusing specifically on how to try to turn Gaza around.
Thank you. Thank you. October 7th, obviously, will profoundly change the nation of Israel politically and socially. And I want to get some of your insights about that. But in addition to that, how do you see it changing the relationship between American Jewry and Israel? And how do you see it perhaps even transforming Jewish identity and the practice of Judaism moving forward? Typical Jewish three-part question, sorry.
So let's begin with the American Jewish-Israeli relationship. The reason that we were in crisis is because the relationship had become increasingly dysfunctional. We weren't listening to each other. We didn't understand each other. We were speaking literally two separate, even opposing Jewish languages. In Israel, we're speaking the language of Jewish survival and Jewish peoplehood and tribalism. And American Jewry increasingly was speaking the language of Jewish universalism. And I say Jewish universalism because it is a universalism is not alien to the Jewish sensibility. Tikkun Olam is not a betrayal of Jewish identity. I think that liberal American Jews went too far with Tikkun Olam, and by centralizing Tikkun Olam almost to the exclusion of other crucial elements of Jewish identity, Tikkun Olam became really the most passionate component of liberal Judaism. And I think that was a serious mistake. And so this is a chance to look at our relationship and to begin to rethink the ways in which we allowed ourselves to get to this point of crisis. And I think this is really a moment where we need to ask ourselves, how did we let this happen? The two great centers of Jewish life in our time. And again, I think in post-Holocaust terms, partly because of my own background, partly because I'm writing a book about it now. And I think about these two centers. This is the Jewish people today. 90% of the Jewish people is either in Israel or America. How did we allow it to get to the point where we could even conceive of a divorce between us? And so the first thing is that we need to be pulling back from the abyss. Now, you know, Danny, because you invited me to your synagogue to speak about this. In the last year, I was very involved, as you became as well, in trying to reimagine the American Jewish-Israeli relationship on the basis of shared democratic values and resisting the attempts of this terrible government to undermine the rule of law in Israel and really upend the delicate balance between Israel's Jewish and democratic identities. And I felt that this is a model of how American Jews and Israelis can work together. Because I was turning to American Jews because no one understands democracy better than American Jews. No one has used democracy more to their advantage as a minority than American Jews. You are the world experts in democracy. And we in Israel are still a very immature democracy. We're a democracy under constant threat. And I felt we needed the wisdom of American Jews. And so I was turning to American Jews for help. Now, that's not part of the usual dynamic of the American Jewish-Israeli relationship. We expect you to contribute money, to lobby for Israel, to support AIPAC. We don't turn to you for advice. We don't turn to you as partners. Help us solve our problems. We have a problem with democracy in Israel. I need you to help me. And so I see this last year as a really precious moment, a kind of a potential turning point. That's where American Jews and Israelis, for the first time in our relationship, act like mature Jewish adults who have a shared responsibility for the Jewish future and respect each other. The key word here is respect. We in Israel, we have not respected American Jewry. We have not respected the religious expressions that you've created. We've taken you for granted. But in the last year or two, I think we've realized we can't take you for granted, because the relationship could slip away if it remains on that dysfunctional model. And it can't be one way. And so we need to start rethinking for the long term, how do we in Israel relate to the non-Orthodox liberal denominations? How do we begin to think of American Jews as having something to teach us, and not only as a support system, as a partnership? And in terms of American Jewry, I think American Jews need to start looking at Israel not just as a political issue, not only through the lens of the sum of our political or moral crises, but Israel is a tremendous cultural resource. The fact that we have created the most extraordinary Jewish music that belongs to all Jews. It doesn't only belong to Israelis, but American Jews don't know this music. There are so many cultural riches that are being created that we take for granted in Israel. Oh, well, that's just Israeli culture. No, we are an incubator for the meeting point of Judaism and modernity in our way, as you are in your way. And we need to learn from each other. We need to understand what have you learned about Judaism by being voluntary Jews, which is a concept, by the way, Israelis don't understand at all. And when American Jews say that we're all Jews by choice, that's completely out of the Israeli context, because we kind of see ourselves as coerced Jews. So we have something that we really need to unpack here. We need to learn each other's Jewish experiences. And when this is all over, God willing, and we emerge from the literal or metaphorical ruins of this moment, we really need to start rethinking in a deep way, what is the relationship between the world's largest and most important diaspora and the Jewish state?
Beautifully stated. Beautifully stated. Last question, just your thoughts on the Israeli version of the favorite American pastime of political speculation about what the future is going to hold for our leadership. I know you've spoken about this in other venues, but what's your sense about what's next for the Israeli government? Because I think the future of Israel in many ways depends on what the tone and tenor of the next generation of leadership is going to look like.
Well, first of all, the day after the war, you will see an outbreak of protests that is unprecedented in Israeli history. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis will take to the streets and not move until Netanyahu resigns. I'm prepared to go to jail at age 70. I'm prepared to go to jail, if necessary, to bring down this government. And the demonstrations will be led, my strong sense is, by the survivors of the massacre. It will be led by reservists coming back from the front who are enraged at what this government has done to Israel. And Netanyahu is living an illusion if he thinks he's going to wiggle his way out of this one. And he does. Apparently, he does think so. But it's finished. And I would have preferred to see him thrown out now. But I understand that in the middle of a war, it's complicated. And so most of us are biting our tongues and biding our time. but as soon as this war is over, we are back in the streets. Now, what I sense of the Israeli mood politically um, are two opposing trends. The bad news is that the far right, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but Ben Gvir in particular, will be strengthened. I don't think substantially, but I think the far right will come out of this stronger, and that's inevitable. You don't go through this kind of a trauma without the extremes seeming to have the answers. But my strong sense is that most Israelis will be hungry for national unity, for stability. We have just had the worst year in Israel's history. Between the last 10 months of dissent and this feeling of being assaulted by our own government and the sense of Israeli society coming apart at the seams, and then the worst nightmare in Israel's history, October 7th, and then coming together in this extraordinary way. If you would have asked me 2 months ago, would Israeli society ever be able to come back together again? I'm not sure that I would have answered positively. And so we've surprised ourselves by our renewed capacity for national cohesiveness. But in order to maintain that, this government must go, and we need a center government coming in. It will be a center right government primarily, but moderate right, and a government that is committed to healing a broken people. So in that, and that I think could be the beginning of a basis for the renewed relationship for the renewal of the relationship between American Jews and Israel. So I'm hopeful. I am hopeful in the not even the long term, really the middle term. I think that October 7th is a turning point in many ways, and not least in ending this disastrous experiment with a far-right, ultra-Orthodox government.
Wonderful. That's a good, hopeful note to conclude. Yossi Klein Halevi, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your energies, your advocacy, and your wisdom that is widely disseminated, particularly at a time that is so needful as this. And listen, wishing you, your family, your community, and the people of Israel chazak ve'ematz, and ultimately shalom down the road, to be strong, courageous, resolute, and hopefully to be at the end in a place of peace moving forward.
Danny, thank you for your friendship and your partnership. Deeply appreciate it.
Take care.